we live in a sense of dualism, the separation between I and other. And this, of course, is understood as a complete misunderstanding of our true nature. We are absolutely an integral part of this broader divinity. Caravan suggests it's been 13.8 billion years in the making that brings us to the present and to this threshold of the potential for merging macro and microcosmic dimension.
Welcome to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Fiveson. Today we have a very special guest, a friend of mine, Mr. Judson Davis, PhD. Judson is an internationally recognized depth psychologist and spiritual counselor who has really spent his whole life and many years exploring the interplay between psychology, spirituality, and cross-cultural studies. With a Doctorate of Philosophy in East-West Psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and a master's degree in counseling psychology from the Pacifica Graduate Institute, he has taught at several universities worldwide. Judson is also an accomplished author and filmmaker, having produced documentary films and authored numerous publications on topics related to psychology, spirituality, and culture. In this episode, we will be discussing the reemergence of the divine feminine and its relationship with Chris Bache's work with LSD and healing personal and collective trauma. Additionally, we will dive into how these topics complement or challenge the perspectives of Anne Baring and Jude Caravan. Join us as we explore the fascinating intersections between psychology, spirituality, psychedelics, and culture, and look at the divine feminine. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Judson Davis. Judson Davis, hi, how are you? So good to see you again, my friend.
I am very happy to see you, Keith, and very much looking forward to our chat today. I think we're going to be going into some very interesting material.
Oh, well, you know, I was very excited to have you back because you're one of the few people that I feel like we can kind of unpack a whole bunch of other areas, you know, whether or not it's talking about a mandala, talking about Tibetan Buddhism, talking about quantum physics or the nature of reality, or in this particular case, really starting to unpack the idea of creation or the idea of the divine feminine. And, you know, I want to kind of get into that today because, you know, going from the alpha to the omega, really looking at, you know, shunyata, looking at the whole idea of infinite beingness. You know, I'm talking about a lot of stuff here. You know, so tell me, what have you been up to? And, you know, how does what you're doing now relate to some of the things that we've been talking about, and how can we kind of dive into some of these deeper topics? Because, you know, we know each other, we know each other through, certainly through LinkedIn, through introductions with Miles Neal. I know your work, I've read your work, and, you know, you're really kind of looking to unpack the nature of reality in a big way. And we kind of talked a little bit before about the microcosm and the macrocosm, and how do we kind of show up in this world, given all the cesspool of trauma that so many people are dealing with, and so many people are trying to navigate their way through so that they can really show up as authentic beings while they're still, you know, pardon the expression, shoveling shit against the storm, you know. So give me a sense of how we can kind of maybe dive into some of these topics here, because Chris Bache is a big part of what we want to talk about. Anne Baring and Jude Caravan's work. So, you know, maybe we can start with some of that and get some perspective around how this all kind of fits. Yeah? Does that sound good?
Right. Wonderful. And the authors you mentioned, for me, have been a tremendous influence for some time now. But more recently, I'm seeing this wonderful convergence between the work of Christopher Bache and his 20-year experiential encounter with LSD psychotherapy and the different remarkable dimensions and beings that he encountered in the course of this process. It's a total game changer in the sense of understanding the broader connection between the microcosmic aspect of earthly existence and the broader regions of the macrocosm, where we originate from and where we're headed, and whether or not this life that we live as human beings and as planetary citizens is actually on some level predestined. If there is a creative intelligence at work that has been present from the very beginning of our universe until the present. And this is something that Jude Currivan, in her capacity as a leading cosmologist and quantum physicist, has traced and beautifully articulated in her work. The story of Gaia is her most recent work. The cosmic hologram preceded that just a few years ago. And this is a fascinating study, dating back to the very origin of our universe and her understanding of the divine feminine, this creative intelligence, this kind of mother of the universe, if you will, that has been guiding and creating and unveiling this process of evolution from simplicity to increasing levels of complexity. And more recently, on this great multi-billion-year process, human beings have arisen as the most complex form of life. And there are great implications to that as far as the fulfillment of a kind of original plan for the merging of earthly existence with its divine origin. This is something also that Anne Baring speaks about. She comes at it as a world-renowned scholar of religion and mythology, and she traces the origins of the goddess culture on Earth, which was a celebration of the sacredness and unity of all of life, of which human beings are a mere part. And the manner in which over the course of many centuries we veered away from this sense of the sacred feminine, of being children of the Great Mother, and moved into a male-dominated and largely conflict-oriented mindset, which we are still dealing with now in the 21st century, although we are seeing now a return to an appreciation on different levels from different disciplines, including these three very primary influences. And so it's a very, very interesting time to be alive.
Right. It's fascinating, though, when we start taking a look at this, because I really do believe, as you say, that we're moving towards a more matriarchal understanding, away from the patriarch, an understanding of the decolonization, if you will, of mindset from, the systems that really have literally plagued the planet, have been a virus to so many species, and so much of the food supply, the water supply, the air supply, and so on and so forth. All these things are Maya. All these things are Earth. All these things are divine. They are our existence. They're where we come from. That's where we're going. And yet, at the same point, I think the real question is this idea of the divine feminine, or understanding of the divine feminine, really understood? Is it understood by? I think there's this new consciousness being raised, but there's a difference, I think, between what, as I read it, between what Baring and Currivan's work talks about, and emphasizing the earth as a living being as a living, as a living being, as a central theme, versus Beche's work, right? And how, that's much more of a universal theme, or much more of it doesn't exclude it, but it's sort of, it seems to me more theistic in some respect, perhaps. Can you speak to that? Can you talk to that? Am I wrong about that, or where? I'm just kind of making the stuff up as I go along.
Well, these are wonderful considerations, and I think they're very important questions. And I think we're finding out as we go, as these realizations and this broader contextual understanding between different disciplines continues to present itself and to overlap and to merge. I do see correlations between the work of all three authors. I think Bosch uniquely, because of the sheer intensity and depth and variety of his experiences in innumerable dimensions, is especially relevant from as you said, a macrocosmic context. Although certainly Jude Currivan goes there with quantum physics and cosmology, but Beche is, from a theistic standpoint, I think a tremendous source of insight. If you don't mind, I'd like to read a short quote of his, which I think gives some background to his perspective in this regard. This is sometime into his 20-year journey. As many people know who are familiar with his work, he did 73 LSD trips over the course of about a 20-year period.
And he was very meticulous in his journaling about them all, wasn't he?
Yeah, and very meticulous in the way that he planned and performed these so-called trips. They were not done indiscriminately. They were done in the most careful and structured fashion possible. And it took him to some remarkable places and some remarkable realizations.
He sort of also did the McKenna kind of approach towards really, like he did these alone for the most part, right?
Well, his psychedelic experiences were certainly done alone, but he had, especially in the latter part of that 20-year period, he began to engage with these leaders in the field, including McKenna, I believe, and certainly Stanislav Grof, who was a direct influence on his experiences. So. But getting back to this male-female connection and our connection to a deeper process, I'd like to read the following quote.
Please.
It's from LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven, page 129, and it's under the subtitle Cosmic Lovers. And I quote Beche's work here. Quote, "I was taken back to the beginning of creation and there experienced human evolution in the context of a larger cosmic process. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed by the most extraordinary love, a love unlike anything I had ever encountered before. It was as if a dam had burst and love was coming at me from every direction. So much love that I could barely take it in, even in my expanded state. It was a romantic love, cosmic in scope and intensity. As I stabilized under the amorous assault, I began to remember a romance from deep within my history, an ancient love, a divine love of unbelievable proportions. I was a cosmic being loved by another cosmic being. Though at one level I had never been separated from my lover, at another level we had been separated for billions of years, and my return was rekindling our ancient love. Creation seemed to be a reality that had come forth from a dynamic relation between two cosmic beings who had themselves emerged from a primal unity. One being who felt more like a she had plunged herself into the task of creating space-time and the physical universe, knowing in advance that she would eventually lose her self-awareness in the work and become unconscious of her true nature for billions of years. The other being, who felt more like a he, had remained fully conscious outside of space-time. The creating half had voluntarily submitted to this long and painful isolation in order to create the raw substance of the physical universe, which would in time become transparent to divine intention as matter evolved into increasing self-awareness. With the phase of this work now largely complete, the self-imposed exile was coming to an end, and the lovers were at long last being reunited.
Wow. Sounds like a good journey.
Well,
it's the cosmic goo. I
think to, the average human being and to really any of us, even those of us who are more inclined to this kind of possibility, it seems almost unbelievable. He's talking here about contact with dimensions of such immensity and of such power and reach that we cannot fathom it with our normal human conception. At the same time, he is having these direct experiential encounter with forces that are beyond our immediate awareness, and yet apparently in his experience. And this is something that is reiterated in Curavan's and Bering's work from their own standpoints. It stands back as the origin, the very foundation of earthly existence, and it is the process through which we are moving. We have, like the divine feminine in this context, we are part of that. We are children of the Great Mother, and we too have forgotten, as Beish outlined, this original agreement made billions of years ago by these two archetypal entities. And apparently the agreement was that the awareness of one's true nature on an earthly level was necessary and agreed upon by one half of this union as part of bringing the earth and the physical cosmos, the universe, into being. But the ultimate goal, and this is absolutely aligned with Curavan's findings and Bering as well, is that there is a creative intelligence at work in the universe that lies behind everything that has unfolded. And we are part of a master plan by which eventually human beings, as part of this extraordinary process of billions of years of evolution, ultimately serve as the vehicle through which aspects of the divine are brought into fruition on the earthly plane.
That's beautiful. And I while you were talking, while I was hearing this, I sort of had a moment where I felt like I was being birthed. I had a birthing moment. It's sort of, where the man becomes the woman and the woman becomes the man, and here we are entwined, and here we are giving birth, and here we are naturally wanting to suckle and wanting to be a part of the mother, to be fed, to be nourished, to be cared for. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And yet at the same point, I have, as I speak and as I listen to you, and as I hear about this, imperative, this divine imperative, I have angst, and I have, some trepidation and some fear that we're stuck in this mechanistic view that really is very, reductionist, and has us, just heads down for the whole, for the mass, that are entwined on the the rabbit wheel or the mouse wheel or the whatever you call it, the rat wheel, that are entwined on that just to survive. So I'm wondering where cosmology would say, astrology would say that we're sort of on the verge of some massive changes and and certainly when we look at what's happening in the realm of psychedelics and psychology and the ability for people to move into states of consciousness with, meditation or spirituality or psychedelics, we have some opportunities there. But I'm wondering, from your view, how do we really, together we've got Chris Bache's work, we've got Anne Baring's work, we've got Jude Corrivan's work. Together, it's they offer a real comprehensive understanding of the personal and the potential for transformation, right? But how do we, is there are we in the midst of a shift, and what might that look like, that people can reclaim their authenticity as beings of the planet, planetary beings, universal beings, taking care of the stewardship of Mother Earth, planet Earth. So
I think this is really the central question of our time. I think that we are, in our present states, all of us, we live in a sense of dualism, the separation between I and other. And this, of course, is understood as a complete misunderstanding of our true nature. We are absolutely an integral part of this broader process, this broader divinity. We are atoms in the great mind of God, in essence. And yet on this earth, as part of this multi-billion year process, Corrivan suggests it's been 13.8 billion years in the making that brings us to the present and to this threshold of the potential for actually merging macro and microcosmic dimensions, so that there is a greatly expanded sense of what you're talking about, this unified, holistic sense of inherent divinity, which is our nature, which is our birthright, and yet, for the most part, is largely absent from the world. I mean, we look at the history of the world and we see tremendous suffering, tremendous anguish, wars, famines, all kinds of the raping of the earth. So exactly how we get there and how it will look, that's a great question. And I think that's still unfolding. But I do think this, that we are part of something that will breathe itself through us in any case. We are in the embrace of the Great Mother, and she and these other profound forces that are at work will by nature guide us as they have been throughout. And so it's not so much that we have to act as, I would suggest, wake up to the presence of who we really are and to become co-creators with this immense creative intelligence, which is our origin, of which we are children, but of which we are also part and parcel the same fabric of reality. And so I think we are headed for a reunion, a kind of divine marriage, going back to Bache's story a moment ago, between these two tremendous cosmic forces. I think the divine feminine, after billions of years, is waking up on Earth, and she is waking up through human beings in our sense of being part of a broader unified field, a broader unified and divine intentional consciousness that has been guiding this process from the outset. To awaken to that is to become empowered by it and to merge with aspects of its divinity, of its power.
Hmm.
How that will look, how that manifests in a given person or in a given period as we move forward in the decades to come, wonderful question. And I don't have that answer, but what I do think is this. There are so many convergences occurring and arising and unfolding at the moment between these various disciplines. And we're seeing so much of an overlap coming in relation to the sense of a unified field of human beings belonging to this immense creative intelligence, and that this notion of a separate self is beginning to increasingly fall away. It will, however, quite naturally involve degrees of conflict and strife, because we are dying to ourselves and dying to our own limitations and dying to the old paradigm that you mentioned, this 300-year period of scientific materialism, the mechanistic paradigm, which has so divided human beings from nature, from each other, and from its own deeper divinity.
Yeah. We're, I think the whole idea of us being organic beings rather than mechanistic beings, where you kind of, replace a part rather than deal with the underlying emotions that, created the cancer. You take out the cancer, but you don't cure the heart of the individual or the trauma that might be resident there. And I speak to that as a 2-time cancer survivor who, went into integrative health and looked at, all these integrative paths. And I think there's something there that you mentioned that is, really important here, because Bering, Kurven, and Beische's understanding of the divine really emphasize the importance of embracing the feminine qualities within ourselves, right? And here we are, and this is especially true for men, right? Women, for the most part, are able to have emotional literacy. They, for some reason, I don't know if it's, some papers say that the brain is wired differently between the left and right hemisphere of the, I think it's a socialization factor more than anything else, perhaps, or a cultural thing, or maybe it's just a maternal thing. But they believe that, having that feminine quality can lead to transformation, which is the key theme in Beische's work. And, Bering and Kurven also explore this role of the divine feminine in spiritual awakening. I'm wondering, from the viewpoint of your viewpoint, where do you see this happening? Because I'm still stuck. Honestly, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. I thought that the Equal Rights Amendment was ratified. I thought that women were equal. I've thought that all of my life, that women are not only equal, but they're superior in many ways, because they can create, they have motherhood. They're able to, and it's true, they do live longer, and men are, oppressed in many ways, in terms of wars, in terms of, repression, depression, suicides, all of this. I mean, men they're not winning out here. They got a problem. So let me just stop there and let you kind of pick up from where I'm at and see, what do you think about all that stuff?
Well, this is, I think, another key point. We're being called now to be more androgynous beings, to integrate the male and the female. If we were to just very briefly kind of generalize, the qualities that can be aspired to each on a human level, I think the male is more cognitive by nature. There is also more of a physical thrusting out into the world, almost the desire to conquer and to control, as part of our adaptation to physical environments. But also we see this just in world history, the constant battles, which are again and again really the result of the male attempting to expand his domain. Personally, I think this is an unconscious misdirection of the broader process of expanding your consciousness. But that's a subject for another time. Women by nature are relational. And they have, as you mentioned, I think a higher level of emotional intelligence. They have the capacity, as do men in a different way, but I think there is a more natural inherent capacity for empathy, for compassion, for nurturing, for caring, but relational in its most essential form. The understanding that they are part of other human beings. There really ultimately is no separation between us. And the more that you feel that intuitively, and intuition is a big part of the feminine character, I believe, the more you, by nature, wish to engage your fellow human beings as equals and as members of a broader family, and in its highest potential, yourself. You are, I am you and you are me. We derive from the same origin, and ultimately we share on the highest cosmic level. There is no separation. There is this unity. I think women are more inclined to this awareness, and certainly more inclined to a compassionate and relational understanding of human beings and of the world at large. We think of nature as being feminine. All of nature is a unified field of which human beings are but a part. And again,
is it socialization? I'm jumping in here because I'm wondering about, like, is it socialization? Because I feel like if you get men together, I'm a Iron John, I'm a kind of a believer in the idea of men coming together and men really, like, I think there's a hunger that we've got that really has not, it's a hunger for other men. It's a hunger that of community of brothers. It's a hunger to come together and to band together as brothers, in this experience. And men aren't, we come together, and like our social mores are such that, we can't come together unless there's a game where people are fighting and we're on one team or another, or some other outside element, rather than coming together and talking about the challenges of just being a man.
Absolutely, and that's a great question, and it's important also to I think bring this point forward, because by no means do I suggest that men are that we lack the capacity for tremendous compassion and a sense of the deep relational to the earth and to our fellow human beings. But I think it has historically been less prevalent than with women. And I think what you just mentioned is exactly the process by which men are awakening to their so-called feminine side, what Jung would call the anima. And the anima is understood as the feminine aspect of a man's soul, through which he achieves a greater understanding of his psychic totality and of his inherent sacredness. And so I think this is part absolutely of what is unfolding. Men are increasingly, slowly but surely, moving more toward an understanding of unity, of relationship, of interconnection, and of being part of the Great Mother. That we too quite naturally possess aspects of both the masculine and the feminine. And this is the whole point of the merging of opposites in both Jungian and Tibetan Buddhism, Jungian's work and Tibetan Buddhism. This is essential, and that's why it is so important, I think, as we move forward, to be able to deactivate or deprogram some of these very concretized notions of masculinity and notions of humanity. We're so stuck in not only what it means to be a man as we inherit this from our culture, but also we live in a dualistic mindset, which is inherently anti-feminine, because the divine feminine is all about a unified totality, a unified field. And the more we can lessen and loosen the notion of being separate entities and merge with our fellow human beings and with the planet and with the cosmos, the more we touch the divine feminine, the more we connect with who we really are. And again, if Beisha's earlier quote from the book that I shared a bit back is any indication, this is part of a broader plan. It was part of an intentional evolution through physical matter, which over billions of years, as articulated by Curavan and Bering from their own unique perspectives, has brought us forth to this time in history. And the idea is that we awaken to the divine feminine as the mother of our origin and the mother of this physical creation. And it's the merging of the macrocosm and the microcosm, as you alluded to earlier, that is the work of our time. We must find a way, or we must simply surrender to the old paradigms, both socially and gender-based, and allow ourselves to take in and to embody this love, this immensity, this interrelationship which connects all things.
Beautiful. And I don't know if this is part of the sort of the movement of really understanding gender fluidity, understanding pronouns, understanding, that the man is in the woman and the woman is in the man kind of concept or construct that, it really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, love is all that really matters, right? Love is love, and love needs to be honored. And that, for the most part, has gotten the affiliation, the greater affiliation with the divine, the feminine, the mother, the creation, the whole idea that, the patriarchy and, the 200-300 years of the patriarchy and, Newtonian science has really done a lot to mechanize or move us away from our own humanity, our own sense of love, our own sense of divine. But, we can, others can argue that point, certainly looking at, the rise of the patriarchy, whether or not it's, from a religious context or whether or not it's from a social context, just because of the strength or, as you pointed out before, the differences, the physiological differences, or the inability to express ourselves. So we, as men, so we wind up, conquering the world, which conquering nature, our own nature for that matter. I'm wondering, from, because we're looking at all of this, what, potential criticism, in what ways do, does the whole concept of divine feminine challenge these traditional patriarchal views of spirituality and religion? Because that is a good segue, because here we have this, and what are the challenges? I mean, because we've got, I'm going out next month to the Psychedelic Science Convention. We're going to have 7,000, 10,000 people there, scientists, researchers, doctors. There is this opportunity to expand consciousness. We're hoping, that there's going to be legislation and, adaptation throughout the psychological, community, psychiatry community, to go ahead and look at ways of dealing with these traumas. But it just seems to me that we've got challenges. And, part of that seems to me to be the, the religious challenges. We're still very, this transformation is still very much in its infancy. And
Yes.
just like witches were burned at the stake, because they threatened the power structures, I'm just wondering what the potentialities are here and how we have to nurture this so that it spreads in a very, organic way that people say, yeah, of course this makes sense.
And again, I think this is a wonderful point. I think we are now, as part of this awakening, moving into a greater acceptance of the use of psychedelics as a way of healing and transforming people. This is nothing new. We know that thousands of years ago, shamans and other people, other cultures were engaged in these very profound psychic processes, which often involved a deep healing for individuals or the community. Beish entered into LSD therapy via Stanislav Grof's direct influence.
And I'm going to meet him, by the way. I'll be meeting him next month. I'm in his workshop. He's still alive, 94, 90. I think he's 94.
Remarkable. I met him years ago when I was studying at CIIS, where he was a professor, a very interesting guy, and his, to people who
the OG
the community, he requires no further introduction. But he had a profound effect on Beish, and Beish entered into this process in part to heal his own inner shadow and his own complexes, and thought that it was as well as to expand his understanding of the nature of reality. But it was a personal journey in the beginning. He had no idea that it would venture into these other hugely expanded domains, ultimately into the collective species mind, as he describes it, of humanity. And all of these profound revelations, all of these profound experiences, contacts with ethereal beings, the waking up into dimensions that are beyond, descriptions in human terms. And yet again and again and again, he was guided by this creative intelligence that was unseen, but whose presence was utterly palpable, so powerful, so miraculous was it, and its ability to take him into different dimensions. For him to encounter and experience those dimensions, because they are so radically different from our earthly existence, he had to die to his old self. There was a constant process of death and rebirth by which he would shed the skin of his old self, be it gender, be it human identity, be it his background, education, formative upbringing. All of these things were absolutely stripped away. And they had to be in order for him to move into dimensions which were completely different from our normal identification. This is what we're being asked to do in a nutshell. And this is what LSD psychotherapy does, and that's why it has this great potential for therapeutic benefit. It strips away the ego's normal conception of identity as well as its defense mechanisms, and you are taken into states of awareness and even other dimensional realities that completely expand your sense of who you are and what your origin is. This is the great potential that LSD psychotherapy has, not only from a therapeutic standpoint, where people are able to more clearly experience and address their complexes and their shadow aspects, but the movement into expanded realities which are our nature and to which we are normally divided.
Yeah, I had I know we're running short on time. I had Justin Henke, who is the CEO from Mind Bio, LSD research company in Australia, And just some, and we talked on one of the podcasts going back, and just the work and just the awakenings that people have gone through, the release of trauma, the sense of being loved, the sense of the ineffable, the sense of their own agency, really having a sense of their own godliness, if you will, that, they were in charge of their reality, that, they could shed off the old skin and they could be rebirthed through this process, I think is just simply amazing. And, it's not just LSD, it's obviously, lesser, if you will, when you look at ketamine, which is not really a psychedelic, it's more of a dissociative agent, but it acts in some ways, or even some other things like, whether or not it's peyote or whether or not it's ayahuasca, whether all of these things not being legal, but then, looking at psilocybin, or as, some people like to say, psilocybin. The whole idea of, just being able to see yourself or step away from the vehicle of your reality, and then being able to change the tires on your vehicle, So that whole idea, I think, is just absolutely amazing. And to me, we're at the precipice of some huge changes. And I don't know how much we're going to see in our lifetime, but, because it's a slow moving vehicle. But, I hope to see many of them. Your work has been outstanding. Judson, you've just done some really amazing things in terms of your breadth of work and your breadth of vision. I'm wondering if people want to kind of explore a little bit more of not only your work, but also the topics. How would you direct them, and where would you sort of point them?
Well, first of all, I would encourage everybody to explore the work of the three authors that we have been discussing today, because I think they are profoundly influential and at the leading edge of this movement. If people wish to contact me directly, they can do so through my website, the Institute of East-West Interdisciplinary Studies, and the web address is east-westinstitute.com. And there they can access for free my publications, some films that I've made. I also offer spiritual counseling within the context of the framework that we've discussed today. And I also offer a course on an integration and comparative study of Jungian depth psychology and Tibetan Buddhist Tantra. So those are things that I am involved in and offer to interested parties. But I think in general, we are seeing the convergence again of so many different voices, so many profound and powerful influences. And your podcast has a great many people as well who bring to light certain perspectives and understandings that we need so much at this crucial time. As you said, we really are on the threshold of what I believe will be a major transformation in human consciousness, and it may not occur in its most profound sense in our lifetime, but we are certainly seeing the birthing, as you mentioned earlier, of this process and the convergence of so many intriguing and inspiring voices. And it's a great pleasure to discuss these things with you and to be a small part of that process.
Thank you, Judson. I just was reminded of in my visuals, I get these visuals things, cues coming in, but the birthing process is not an easy thing. It's not like you sort of go in, you say, pop, there you go. There's the new life. It's a lot of sweat. It's a lot of tears. It's a lot of streaming. It's a lot of pain. There's blood. It's not pretty. And it does hurt, and there's pain, and there's crying. So yes. I can't imagine that, this is going to be an easy process, throwing out the old, bringing on the new. We're going to have fractions on both sides, kind of trying to hold on to the old order. But I do believe, as you say, we're at the precipice of this shift, and we're feeling it, we're seeing it, and it's certainly happening in the psychedelic community as we start to take a look at legalization, as we start to move towards individuals who are saying, enough, we've had enough. Let's go ahead and, let's throw off the old. Let's try to find a new way of doing things. So spirituality, totally the idea. I love Joseph Campbell's quote: the difference between religion and spirituality is like the difference between the menu and the meal,
Right. That's great.
And I think that we're all, really hungry for this. So I thank you for opening up the door and, lengthening out the conversation. Again, Ann Baring, Jude Corovan, and Dr. Chris Beisch, all of them wonderful talking about the subject. And Judson Davis, thank you so much for your information and your insight. Again, thank you for coming back onto the podcast and exploring these realms of consciousness that we all need to, or all want to, go ahead and look at.
Thanks very much, Keith. It's been a pleasure yet again, and I want to thank you for all the good work you're doing. And we're all in this together, so let's keep moving forward and make it happen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. We have other exciting guests coming up in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. For more mindfulness tips and tricks, visit our website at workmindfulness.com. Thanks again for being a part of the Mindfulness Experience. This is Keith Fiveson.